Hello everyone, in today's video we will be discussing milling of rice in brief. Welcome to Foodemy. So we will be beginning with the rice milling. So basically first, before understanding rice milling, let's understand what milling exactly is. Now in terms of food, when we say, we can define milling as a series of operation under wet or dry conditions. The conditions chosen for milling can either be wet or dry, which ultimately ultimate aim of dehusking, debranding, splitting or grinding of the food material. So basically, milling will include all these: dehusking as in case of rice, debranding as in case of wheat or rice, splitting as in case of pulses, or grinding as we are doing to produce flour from various cereals. So basically we can say that milling is nothing but size reduction. One more thing, milling can be considered as of two types. One we can say flour milling and one we can say as grain milling. So grain milling basically means only reduction of the size of the grain, as we only milling of the grain, as in case of rice. For example, if I am producing my white rice from brown rice, what I had in initial was a grain and final product is also a grain, so it is a kind of grain milling. I am removing the bran to produce white rice. Flour as in case of wheat. If I am producing wheat flour from my wheat, whole wheat, it is also a type of milling, but we will be calling it as flour milling and not grain milling. So basically milling, we are doing either to remove the husk. Basically we are aiming to produce edible edible products out of the grains. For example, wheat, we cannot consume wheat as such, but if I am milling it and converting it into flour, refined flour, semolina or other products, I am consuming those. So to make edible product out of my cereal grain, I am using milling. Or sometimes just in case of increasing the consumer acceptability, as in case of producing white rice from brown rice. Now I will be talking about objectives of milling in terms of rice. When I am talking about rice, basically I want to remove the husk first, and secondly I want to remove the bran in order to produce the polished rice. So objective of milling in case of my rice will be first removal of the husk, second removal of the bran, and third, I want to produce rice that appeals to the consumer. The ultimate aim of polishing of rice, whitening of rice is increasing the consumer acceptability only. No doubt polished rice has better quality than brown rice. For example, stickiness and all is less. But the main reason is only to increase the consumer acceptability. Whenever I am polishing with the bran, there is a loss in nutrients. Still we are going for polishing because the consumer, the polished white rice appears better to the consumer and it has better acceptability when you compare it to the brown rice. Now fourth is to have minimum number of broken and increase the head rice recovery. Whenever we are talking about milling of rice, we are exerting our rice to various forces in order to mill it. So obviously there will be breakage, and we very well know that there is a demand for greater length of rice, that is we call it as head rice. So we want minimum number of broken, that during the milling process broken rice should be the minimum, and we should have a higher head rice recovery. Now coming on to the methods in case of the rice milling, we can go for traditional method or for the commercial rice milling. In case of traditional, we will be covering the commercial milling process of rice in detail. Let's talk about the traditional milling method right now. Among the traditional milling method, we have mortar and pestle or hand stone, that is we also call it as chakki. So what happened in these traditional equipments, the breakage is very high, that is one thing. Secondly, the basic principle is friction. When we are keeping our rice, putting our rice in a chakki or a mortar, pestle, hand stone, and we're basically grinding it, so basic principle is friction. There is friction between the kernels, like kernel is rubbing against the other kernel and also against the abrasive surface of the equipment being used, that is the chakki or the mortar pestle. So now moving on to rice, the scientific name of rice is Oryza sativa, which is quite easy to learn as it relates to the name oryzinin, which is the principal protein found in rice. So the rice is very similar in structure to the cereal grain and to the wheat grain, and both of they contain endosperm, germ and bran. rice is somewhat smaller than wheat in structure. Endosperm, as we all know, is the majority part of the grain, and it consists of starch. Germ consists of the lipid portion, and bran or the aileron layer consists of thymine, phosphorus, etc. The vitamins and minerals are present in the bran. So, if I am removing, during milling of rice, first I am removing the husk. If I want to produce only brown rice, only and only I want to remove the husk. If I want to produce white rice, I also want to remove the bran. So, if I am removing the bran from the rice, my rice will be poor nutritively. So, it will be deficient in thymine, phosphorus, etc. And my milled rice will be poor in iron and calcium also. So, it was observed in one population that the population only consuming rice all the 3 times, they all had a deficiency of this thymine. So then it was discovered that during milling, when we are removing the bran, we are being devoid of this thymine. So parboiling method was developed to improve the quality of rice nutritively. Basically in parboiling, I am taking my rice within the husk when it is already in the husk, not the dehusked rice, and I am steeping it in water, steaming and drying. So what will happen is there will be diffusion of water inside the rice. The rice will take up water. So there will be migration of nutrients and all the and certain coloring pigments from the outer layers of the rice and the husk to the endosperm. So my endosperm will increase in nutritive value, and thus parboiled rice will have a better nutritive value. So parboiling is sometimes done prior to milling to improve the nutritive value, and also parboiled rice will have a better milling yield because parboiled rice will undergo partial gelatinization due to amylose, and this partial gelatinization will cause hardening of the rice, and when the rice will be harder in structure, it will be easier to mill and remove the husk from the rice as compared to the raw rice, and reduce the breakage. Because my rice will be harder, it can more withstand the energy or the forces I am exerting my rice to during the milling process. It will be more able to resist them and reduce the breakage. If I am taking unparboiled rice, there will be more breakage during the milling because the rice will be softer in texture and it will very easily break from the high forces I am using in order to mill the rice. So here is the milling process is described. I am taking the paddy. Then first step is pre-cleaning. Pre-cleaning, I will be removing the impurities in this step. Next is husk removal. Because the husk is very light in weight, husk will be, after the removal of husk, aspiration will be followed to remove the husk. When I am blowing air through the dehusked rice, what will happen is the air will carry the husk and the rice will be separated in a different column. So aspiration will be used for removal of the husk. Now I will have brown rice which will undergo the whitening process. Abrasive whitening will be done first, followed by friction whitening. Now I have white rice which may undergo polishing. After polishing, length grader will separate my rice based on the length. As I told, in rice, length is very important, whether it is broken or large. So it will be separated into broken and head rice. Now broken can be used in like in case of for producing as a raw product for beer, or it can be used in this rice pudding desserts and all. Broken will be used, whereas head rice will be having a higher demand when where consumers want rice to cook and consume. Then this broken and head rice blending is done. They are blended in somewhat proportion. If I am producing a rice of very high quality, very low broken will be blended in it. And if I am producing a rice of low cost to target the poor consumers, then more mixing of broken will be done in it. Finally, packaging of rice will be done. Now looking at the composition, if let's say paddy is 100%, my husk is almost 20% of that. So when I am dehusking here, I will be left with around 80% brown rice. Brown rice is around 80% and the bran is around 9 to 11% of the paddy, and my white rice will be somewhat around 69 to 71%. So if I am taking 100 kg of paddy, I will be getting around 69 to 71% of the white rice. Now now we will be covering the principles for cleaning, husk removal as well as whitening one by one. Now coming on to the first step of the milling, that is cleaning or pre-cleaning. Now cleaning might not sound very important to us, but actually it is a very crucial step of milling. And I have listed the two names of the types of cleaners used. There is an open double sieve pre-cleaner. As the name suggests, it has two sets of sieve in it, and also there is a fan to provide aspiration, and fan will remove the lighter particles. Another one is single scalper drum cleaner. There are various other cleaners. For example, a destoner can also be sometimes used in order to remove the stone, which will be working on gravity. So why cleaning is very important? Firstly, to attain high milling recoveries, and secondly, to protect our machinery and equipment from wear and tear. What will happen when the paddy will come from the field? It will be containing various lighter impurities in it, let's say straw, weeds, dust, etc. And it will also be containing certain stones or magnetic particles in it. So if I am not cleaning my paddy and just putting it like that in my equipment, there will be wear and tear of my equipment. My equipment might spoil from the presence of stones or certain other hard products, and also milling won't be proper because I am trying to mill and there are straw particles and all coming in between, so milling will not be that good. So I want to attain high milling recoveries, and secondly I want to protect my equipment from unnecessary wear and tear. That is why cleaning is really crucial before milling. So what are the basic principles of cleaning? First, basically the difference in the size, specific gravity, weight and length of the impurities present is the basic principle when I am during my cleaning. The lighter impurities, basic principle is aspiration. As I already told that in aspiration we will be blowing air. So if I am blowing air, my air will be taking up all the lighter particles with it. For example, aspiration is also used to remove husk. When I am after my dehusking, when I am subjecting my rice to aspiration, it is for removal of husk. And just after receiving my paddy, I am again subjecting my paddy to aspiration in order to remove the lighter impurities such as the dust particles or the straw particles. Now for the impurities that are larger or smaller than the paddy, sieving can be done. So if I am having a particular sieve with the size of the paddy, so the smaller and the larger impurities can be separated by the sieve easily. Now impurities with the same size as paddy but heavier, we can separate them using gravity, as in case of a destoner. Even if the stones are having almost the same size as paddy, they will be heavier. So by gravity they will be separated in a destoner. Last is iron or steel particles. They will be removed using a magnetic separator. So all these basic principles are the principles used in cleaning. Not only for paddy, they are applicable to almost all the cereals and other things used in the food industry. Now moving on to the second step, that is the husk removal or the dehusking. We have various dehuskers such as steel husker, underrunner husker, rubber roller, concave type. There are various others like scorer blade, etc. So this steel husker is basically more than a husker because polishing is also done in this husker only. So it is called one pass milling equipment. That is, the husking as well as the polishing is taking place in one equipment only. So what are the principles when we come to removal of the husk? First is the compression and the shear. Compression, as we all know, is basically when we are like pressing it between certain surfaces. So compress, split, and it will strip off the husk. For example, as in case of a concave type husker or in case of a rubber roller husker, the basic principle is compression and shear. Shear is basically when two surfaces are moving in opposite direction and then removing the husk. For example, in case of a rubber roller husker, we have two set of rollers between which the paddy is passed and they are moving at different speeds in different directions and stripping off the husk from it. Second is abrasion and friction. Basically what abrasion is when let's say this is the bran and this is the endosperm. Basically when I am using certain abrasive surfaces, that is very you can say very pointing or very harsh surfaces to remove the outer covering, that is abrasion. And friction is basically when I am rubbing this, when there is something rubbing this and then removing this like this, it will be stripping off the surface of the outer layer or the bran or whatever we are targeting to remove. Then it is friction when I am rubbing and removing something. So abrasion is the use of certain abrasive surfaces. So friction of the grain Friction can be between kernel and between the surface of the equipment and between the grain, and use of certain abrasive surfaces, example as in case of hole ender type huskers. Third principle used in dehusking is impact and friction. Impact, as the name suggests, when certainly I am exerting some very strong force. So how I will create this impact? Usually for creation of impact, centrifugal force will be used. What will happen is my paddy will enter and there will be it will be exerted to certain centrifugal force. So this centrifugal force will suddenly throw it against some hard abrasive surfaces and produce impact. So wherever I am using I want to use impact, use of centrifugal force is done, and there will also be friction along with these surfaces. So impact and friction together are a principle used for dehusking, as in case of certain centrifugal type shellers. Now do not get confused, these shellers, huskers, all these are the type of huskers only. They can be called as huskers, shellers, or various other names are also there. Now among all these shellers used for dehusking, one of the most efficient one and the most commonly used nowadays is the rubber roller husker. One reason for this is it is very efficient, and the chances of breakage is very less when we talk about a rubber roller husker. Basically it is this kind of equipment. I have just given a very rough diagram. The paddy will enter from here, and there is a screw to control the rate by which paddy will enter, and again there are two rollers as already told. This one roller will be fixed. Fixed does not mean that it won't rotate. Fixed means that this roller is fixed on its position, whereas this roller can be moved towards right or towards left with this to adjust the clearance between the two rollers. So both of these rollers will be rotating. This section where the two rollers are there, it is known as the husking section, where the husk is removed, and below it there is another section known as the aspiration section, which will have a blower or an aspirator, you can say, which will be blowing the air. So as already told, what this blower will do, it will remove the husk, because the husk will be lighter. So husk will be carried away with the blower by the flow of the air, and over here we will get dehusked rice or brown rice. So husking section and aspiration section. So what is the basic principle? We have two rollers. This roller is fixed roller. Fixed in the sense fixed on its position, cannot move, but it will be rotating certainly. And this roller is the roller which we can move to adjust this clearance. Let's say my paddy has a very less thickness, then I can, if I want to decrease the clearance, I can shift this roller here through this conveyor. So we can adjust the gap between the two rollers, and the clearance between the two rollers always has to be less than the thickness of the paddy. Otherwise, if it is greater than the thickness of the paddy will just pass and it won't be dehusked. So when I am removing the when I am keeping a gap that is less than the thickness of the paddy, what will happen? Compression will be there because of these rubber rollers. Now look at the type of the material we are using. The rollers are made up of rubber, so this material is soft, so chances of breakage will certainly be less in a rubber roller. Also impact or certain other very strong forces are not being used, and we are only using speed differential is one basic principle. I am using a speed differential because both the rollers are rotating in opposite directions in different speeds. So if there is a speed differential, what will be acting? My shear forces will be acting, and because the paddy will be compressed between the two rollers, compression will also be there. So compression will be there, there will be certainly some friction between all these surfaces and speed differential, and thus dehusking will occur. Now moving on to the whitening and the polishing process. Now people often they use whitening and polishing term interchangeably. Actually they both have a different meaning. When we refer to whitening, basically we refer to removal of the bran. So when if I am just removing the bran, it is whitening. But whereas polishing, after whitening I am doing polishing. Always and always polishing is always followed by after whitening. Why? Because polishing means removal of the adhering bran particles from it. Suppose I have already removed the bran, but still there might be certain tiny particles of the bran that are still adhered to the surface of the rice, that are still not removed. So for that purpose we are doing polishing. Basically in polishing we are subjecting our rice to a jet of air or water to remove the loosely adhered bran particles, or also to give it a smoother surface and a shinier appearance because it will also remove any dust that might have delivered on the rice during passing the rice through all these milling equipments and the bran particles as well. So polishing is done after whitening always. So whitening means removal of the bran, whereas whitening means whereas polishing will mean to give it a final smooth surface just before it is brought to the market. So basically the principle of whitening is abrasion and friction. Abrasion and friction are the principles already explained during the dehusking also. Abrasion, as already told, means subjecting it to certain rough surface, and friction means when I am using friction between the grains or between the grain and the surface of the equipment to remove the bran outer layer. Abrasion subjecting to certain abrasive surfaces, and friction will be subjecting to if I am sliding one object over the other or my grains over the other, this layer will eventually slip off and remove from the surface of the grain. So the equipments used for whitening and polishing are vertical abrasive whitening cone, followed by horizontal abrasive whitening cone, followed by horizontal friction machine. So as you can see, the abrasive equipments will come first and friction will come later. So there is a reason for this also, why always and always abrasion whitening will be done first and then followed by friction, because if I am using only and only friction whitening to remove the bran, it will use a lot of power, and hence energy consumption will be very high and cost for whitening will increase very much. So abrasion, less energy will be used because abrasive surfaces are used. If I am using only and only this sliding friction, a lot of energy requirement will be there. So that the equipments have been listed in that order only. So after whitening, we can for our rice we have length grader, color sorter, etc. And all these equipments we can use. They all have different principles. In case of a color sorter, calibration will be required first, and in case of length grader and all these equipments will be very costly. So milling process is completed. Thanks for watching this video. Please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel.